And Allah Ta'ala. Inshallah ta'ala we'll begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم ينفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما لكريم رب العالمين اللهم نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وشفاء لكل داء آمين رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah all of you are doing well. Last week we were off from the class, so inshallah we're resuming. I don't have any immediate travel, so hopefully inshallah we'll continue for at least the next couple of weeks. Can I ask you if you could okay, I was going to ask them to close the door, but I think they're done with the class. Right. So we're on session number 7 on Bani Isra'il. We're going over as the whole story of Bani Isra'il as much as possible, trying to connect all the verses of the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about them. And then where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't talk about them, we're going to be looking at historical facts and predominantly looking into the Bible and what other people have said about Bani Isra'il. From the last session that we had, session number 6, we talked about how the Persians came and they defeated the Babylonians. And when they defeated the Babylonians, they let the Jews who were exiled in Babylonia to go back to Jerusalem, go back to their homeland. And that's what he called the Edict of Cyrus. Cyrus was one of their great leaders, one of their major leaders. And so he allowed all the Jews to go back, which seemed kind of strange that he would do that, even though he wasn't a believer in one God, but he was a pagan himself. And then also he funded and helped rebuild the temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam, or what we call Masjid Aqsa, if you will. Okay, and so he helped them do that. And then we talked about some of the people of Bani Isra'il that were not exiled. They stayed in the land of Jerusalem and Samaria, Samaria, a little bit north of Jerusalem. How when they came and they wanted to help rebuild the temple. Remember, we call them the Good Samaritans, right? They're called Samaritans. And so they didn't allow them to help because the ones who were in exile believed that these weren't like the true Jews, right? They believed they were the true Jews. And so these individuals sent a letter to Cyrus saying, these guys are going to rebel against you. They're going to stop your tax giving you. And then Cyrus said, you know what, we're going to stop funding this, the temple. And it was paused for about 11 years. We talked about the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Jews have taken Uzair as a son of God. And we talked about what is the opinion of that, as the Jews will claim that they have never took someone as a son of God. And we talked about there was a fraction or a sect of Jews in Yemen that were believed in a son of God, an individual that they believed. And we had some other opinions that we talked about there. Then we talked about how the Greek conquests. So Alexander of Macedonia, right? He comes in and he defeats the Persians, right? And he takes over the land of Jerusalem. And then we talked about the Seleucids. They're another Greek empire that comes in. They emphasize Hellenism, which is pretty much Greek culture, that you have to be speaking in Greek, you have to be talking in Greek, you have to worship the Greek god. And so they started putting pagan idols, their gods, inside the temple, and that some of the Jews started to revolt. And that is the Hasmonean dynasty, called the Maccabees, right? They started to revolt. And they said, you know what, we're going to fight against the Greeks. So they're overstepping. We're not going to worship their gods, on their pagan gods. So that's kind of where we left from last time. It's a mouthful. If you weren't here, it's kind of hard to kind of keep up. But anyhow, the class is also recorded. So here we go to the next. I wanted to go over this. I think we started this last time. We never really got to finish it. I wanted to go a little bit over what are the prophets in the Quran that are mentioned about from Bani Isra'il. And also that what are the prophets in the Bible that are mentioned that went to Bani Isra'il that's not mentioned in the Quran. Now, I'm only going to list a couple of them, but there's a long list of prophets that the Bani Isra'il believe that they had and that are not mentioned in the Quran. A lot of names that you've never heard before. And I can't go over every single one of them. But I wanted to talk about Elias or Elijah. That is one of the prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does mention in the Quran. And of course, the Jews also have this Elijah God. Elijah prophet, sorry. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does talk about Elijah or Elias in the Quran and Surah Saffat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed, Elias was among the messengers. And when he said to his people, will you not fear Allah? Will you not have taqwa? And then he says, أَتَدْعُونَ بَعْلًا وَتَذَرُونَ أَحْسَنَ الْخَالِقِينَ. Do you call upon a Baal? Baal was that god we talked about that was from the Phoenicians, the empire that was north of Jerusalem, and that they would worship them in their empire also. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confirms in the Quran that they were worshiping this god. Okay, and so that's all it said about Elias. We don't have much other than that. Okay, the Bible talks a little bit more about how they rejected him, they didn't listen to him, and so forth. Okay, so that's Elias. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a prophet named Yasa. Okay, his name is they tied with Elisha. That's the prophet of Elisha, and I don't think I put anything about him. There's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentions Yasa, and that's about it. There's a couple of prophets in the Quran. The name is just mentioned, like Dhul Kifl, for example, and nothing else is mentioned of that. This says his name. That's all it does. So Yasa is one of those prophets, and it's tied to Elisha, which is around 800 BC, and that's when they had that unified kingdom in the lands of Palestine. Then there's Yunus alayhi salam. Everyone knows Yunus alayhi salam pretty well. Jonah. Okay, so he was around, as they estimate, around 785. Now, if you remember, around 785, that was the time of the two kingdoms: the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, and he was sent to Nineveh, and that was a land, an area where the Assyrians took the Jews and put them over there. Remember, they conquered the Northern Empire, if you remember that. And so that's where he was sent. And that is where he was talking to Bani Isra'il in exile, that why don't you worship one God? And that's when he left. I'm not going to know the whole story about his life, but that's when he left the town, and then he got swallowed by the whale, got spit back out, right? And they ended up believing after that. Okay. The biblical prophets of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And I'll talk a little bit about Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel's not mentioned in the Quran. Some people say that might be Dhul Kifl. I don't know. It's kind of just the name kind of sounds somewhat similar. But I wanted to bring him up because he's around 571. And that's the time of the exile of the kingdom of Judah. And so during this time, the kingdom of Judah, the exile of in Babylonia, I want to bring up some passages that's in the Bible, what he said about the children of Israel. So it's mentioned in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, where he said, son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites. So this is God talking to Ezekiel, that the Bani Isra'il, I'm sending to Bani Isra'il, a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have been in revolt against me to this very day. Okay, so this is in their Bible. I want you guys to understand that their God, they believe that God is telling Ezekiel that Bani Israel has been revolting to me since they've been on the face of the earth. Okay, right? That's all they've been doing, right? And he's saying, I'm going to send you to them. And he also talks about how they worship different idols in the kingdom. And so he also says that prophesies against the land of Israel and say to her, this is what your Lord says, I'm against you. So he's saying that God is telling them that I'm against you. I will draw my sword from its sheath and cut off you both, the righteous and the wicked. Right, this is pretty strong words that Ezekiel is telling Bani Israel, that God is pulling a sword out and he's going to cut you guys off. Okay, that if you think that's God's favoring them by any chance, I don't know if you're not reading the passage correctly here. There's no favor there. There's no pleasure of God with Bani Israel at all. These are verses in the Bible. It's not Quran here, right? This is what's in their books, right? And it's interesting when you bring up some of these passages to them, they would admit, like, you know what? They kind of use a statement sometimes we use where we say Islam is perfect, but Muslims have common issues sometimes. We have Muslim, presidents and prime ministers and whatever kings that are not the best. So they always say that the Judaism is perfect, but Jews have an issue, right? But still here, like he's talking about Bani Israel, what they were doing. They worship false gods, and God is going to cut them off. Look what it says: the righteous and the wicked. So it doesn't seem like God is happy with any of them. Even the righteous, you would think, why the righteous, right? Maybe because they're there too and they're not correcting the situation. That could be it. But I wanted to bring this up, that this is in their books, and it shows you that, they had a lot of issues that were going on there. There's Isaiah, there's Ezekiel, there's Daniel. There's other things to say about Daniel that's mentioned in their book. I bring that the prophet Daniel up because sometimes I don't know if you guys ever heard Muslims named Daniel, right? Daniel, right? Especially in the Desi community, that ends up being. I met an Arab brother. His name was Daniel the other day, so I questioned him. Well, who is Daniel? He's like, I heard it was a prophet, and then he knows who I am here. So he's like, was it in the Quran, Hadith? And I told him, I don't know. Felt a little bad for him, but it's a name that's there. It's not in the Quran. It's not in Hadith that we know of. It's in books of tafsir that's usually taken from the Jews and the Christians. Those narrations. If somebody want to call himself Daniel, I mean, I don't think it's haram or anything like that. But anyhow, right? But they have a story about Daniel, and he was in the lands of Babylon when they were exiled. He was thrown into a den with lions. And then the lions wouldn't eat him because he was a prophet. And the lions would just stay there tame. And that was a sign that he was a prophet. There's more that tells a little bit more about his story. But I wanted to bring that up because sometimes people, I don't want to say that it's wrong to call yourself Daniel, but anyhow, just wanted to bring that up there. Moving on now. So we're around 63 before Common Era. Before 0, okay? We're going down. Before the birth of Isa, alayhi salam, that's where we're at right now. Now the Romans come in, right? So if you probably got the pattern by now, anytime you have an empire, someone's going to come and knock you off. This is kind of the way it happens, right? So we had the Greeks that were ruling for a while. The Roman Empire comes. So all the Caesars, right? Not Caesar salad, but there's all the Caesars out there, right? So Julius, the famous Julius, Caesar Julius, he's the one that kind of starts it off, and there's a bunch of other Caesar that come after that. And so the Roman Empire comes in, right? And they take over the Greek kingdom and the lands of Jerusalem. They occupy Jerusalem around 663. And there they appoint someone named Herod as the king of the Jews. Now, Herod is a Jew himself, but he's a puppet. You all see this, what happened, unfortunately, our country goes into Iraq and Afghanistan, and then they put a president there that's Muslim. And then we kind of clap and we're like, nah, I don't know, right? It's like a puppet leader kind of, if you will. So the same thing. He's a Jew, but they put him in there. They can control him, and they collect tax from him, okay? He's a tyrant to the Jewish people. The Jewish people hate him. He treats them very, very bad. So he tries to please them a little bit more. So what he does, he starts to expand the temple, the second temple, the temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam, which they call it the second temple. So he builds it up nice, he makes it all grand and with the better features. Some of the books of the Bible say that it was better than the kingdom of the palace of Sulaiman alayhi salam. It was more grand than that one, if you will. So he did that to really please the people so that they will win his favor, that they would like him, even though he was not the best to them. Okay. He ends up defeating the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, the Jewish leaders at that time. Okay. And he has, he becomes a leader at that time. I also mentioned Cleopatra, the one sister that was talking about Cleopatra. Yeah, that's the Cleopatra of this couple women that were named Cleopatra in history. But this is the one that was in Egypt, that she was coming back from a visit from Persia, and she stopped in Jerusalem, and she met with them and the leaders of the Jews in there, and ended up being a good tie with the Jews, if you will, and so made a good relation between Rome and Egypt. Now, Herod, even though he's a Jewish king, he has a great tie with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is the one that put him into power, right? So it made a good connection with there. They don't have to worry about them attacking him at all. I wanted to kind of show a little bit of how he rebuilt this second temple here and what we currently have today. And we'll talk a lot about this, the Masjid Aqsa and the complex of Masjid Aqsa. I call it the complex because the whole area is called Masjid Aqsa. Today, you'll see that Masjid Aqsa, this little building right here. That's what usually they call it, Masjid Aqsa. Some people call it Masjid Qibli. It's also called Masjid Qibli. And then the Dome of the Rock, we all know. This is where the Prophet ﷺ went up to the skies on Isra and Mi'raj, right? And it's also interesting, the Jews also believe that this rock area is kind of holy for them. I'm forgetting what their story is about that rock also. So anyhow, he expanded like in this area here, which is kind of very similar where it is today, right? It's called the Temple Mount because on a mount, if you will, it's like below it's ravines, right? It's like a valley around it. Even today you'll see that. and it's there to fortify it and make sure that enemies can't come close to it. So this is what Herod, what he built upon it, and he established it there. Obviously, it's not there today, but that's how he expanded it, and that's kind of like, if you would take a replica, what we have today in the current Masjid Aqsa complex and Masjid Aqsa.
Is that part in the front or in the back?
So that's kind of like a copy paste. So this would be where the Masjid Aqsa would be, the Masjid Qibli would be. The Dome of the Rock would be something over here. This obviously was knocked down, right? This is called the Western Wall because they believe Herod made this wall here, and this is the Jews believe that this is like the wall that's been kept ever since those days, so they keep it kind of sacred, and that's why they go there to worship. There's other reasons why they go to worship, but that's what that. If you ever heard about the Western Wall, this is what the Western Wall is, if you will. Okay.
So that's the Wailing Wall?
Same.
Yeah, I think it's
So that's the older, the yellow one is the.
Oh, that's back in when he rebuilt it in 63 before Common Era. This is what we have modern day.
Is that the Wailing Wall?
Over here, yeah. This area here. You see they've been a little people there. Yeah. Technically right now, currently, this whole area is under the rule of a council that's the Jordanian Council. Okay, of course, the British put those people in, but anyhow, that decides who gets to go in there, and they kind of handle the affairs. But I don't know, it's more interesting. But anyhow, I can say a lot about that. I'll hold my tongue for now. This is the Roman Empire at that time. So the purple is how it was purple. Look up to the chart there. I guess it's the tan. Sorry, the tan is where the original empire started off in 63 BC, if you will, and then they expanded out to all those colors there through multiple of their Caesars that came, Augustus and so forth, other people that came and expanded it. It's almost like a copy paste from the other empires. It seems like they just take over that same exact land. But you see, basically, they take over the lands of Judah and the lands of Palestine in this area here, and they control it from there. Okay. I wanted to go, before we start getting into Isa alayhi salam, I wanted to talk about an ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran multiple places. In 7 places in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how the Jews killed their prophets, okay, which is a very big accusation, okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how they killed their prophets in multiple places. So this is one of the ayats in Surah Baqarah. There's 4 places in Surah Baqarah that's mentioned that, or 3 places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that the Jews killed their prophets. One thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is that when it was said to them, believe in what Allah has revealed, talking about the Quran, they say, we only believe what has been revealed to us, talking about the Torah. Okay, and they disbelieve in what came after it, Isa alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while it is a truth confirming that which is with them, so confirming what's in their books. Say to them, talking to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, say to them, then why did you kill the prophets of Allah before, if you are indeed believers? Okay, why did you kill prophets for? Okay, and so this is one thing that the Jews will kind of look at and say, like, is this true or not? Did they kill their prophets or not? Okay, and that's one of the investigations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is claiming this. So there's a couple of candidates of who they killed, or this, I say it's factual, if you will, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, in the Bible, it mentions 3 people that were kind of killed, that's claimed to be killed by the Jews. Number 1, you have Zechariah alayhi salam. You have Isaiah, which is one of their prophets, and you have Yahya, who is the son of Zechariah alayhi salam. So this is from the book of Matthew. So this is kind of in the New Testament, right? Of book number 23. This is what I want you. This is copy and paste. I want you to kind of read what it says in there. So it says, "You snakes, you brood of vipers," meaning the one that gave birth to vipers, right? More snakes, if you will. Okay. How will you escape being condemned to hell? So they're talking to the Bani Isra'il. Okay. Therefore, I'm sending you. So God's supposed to be talking to them. Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel, Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam alayhi salam, and the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, Okay, that's whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. It's mentioned they killed him in the temple. That's pretty bad. That's supposed to be a sacred place. Okay. Truly, I tell you, all this will come to this generation. So this is what was supposed to come at the time of Isa alayhi salam, talking to the children of Israel, that you killed these prophets, specifically calling out Zechariah. Now, the thing is that when you talk to the Jews, like, hey, this is true that you guys killed Zechariah. For them, their last prophet to come is a prophet called Malachi. This is the last bullet point here on the bottom of the screen here. Okay. So when Zechariah, Yahya, they don't take them as prophets. That's a little debate. Okay. Also, the big issue is that there's about 25 to 30 people in the Bible mention Zechariah who are named Zechariah. So it makes it even more confusing. Who are they talking about? Okay. So Malachi was this last around 400 BC. Okay. So that's really, really long ago. Okay. Zechariah is like, in the 60, BC, if you will. But anyhow, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned they killed prophets. So what it was, that it does mention that they killed a person named Zechariah. There's a lot of debate of, was it Zechariah, the prophet that we know, Zechariah, very well, right? And that's a very strong point that they killed him in the altar, as is mentioned there. Okay. Isaiah, it mentioned that one of the kings of the Jews, Manasseh, one of the kings of the Jews killed him, right? It's mentioned that also. John the Baptist, or Yahya alayhi salam, which is the son of Zechariah, right? It's mentioned that he was killed by Haran's son. Okay, so this is once again another verse in the Bible here, where Book of Matthew says the king was distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guests. It's a really crazy story, but he had a dinner and he had a bunch of guests that was there. The lady that was dancing for him. It's a really interesting story, and said he was drunk. But so the lady made a request: kill John the Baptist, who was in the prison, and bring his head to me. And he's like, and as a favor, me dancing in front of you. Why do Jewish kings have women dancing in front of them? That's a good question, right? And so he said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and kill John. So go ahead and kill Yahya, kill John. And they beheaded him and brought his head up to the lady. And this is not like just, killing. This is terrible, right? So he ordered that the request be granted, and had John beheaded in the prison, right? So it's, once again, this is mentioned in the Bible itself, that they killed Yahya alayhi salam. So Yahya, Zechariah, Isaiah, and there's other prophets that are not mentioned in the Quran. If I bring their names up, it wouldn't make much sense to you who these individuals were, that they also killed. Okay. So, and then once again, if you look up and say, what do you guys, the Jews, do you guys acknowledge that you killed prophets? And they would acknowledge, yes, we did. And I saw one explanation that one of the rabbis said is that, the Bible is authentic. We don't hide our mistakes. We put it there, and so we're truthful in our book. We'll talk about how truthful their book is in a bit. But nonetheless, they don't deny it, that they have killed prophets beforehand. This is one thing is not listening to your prophet, like Hadith Musa alayhi salam. We're going to worship a golden calf, whatever. We're not going to do this. We're not going to fight. One thing is killing your prophet. That is like killing anyone. But killing a prophet is, that's a great way to lose the favor of God Almighty.
They acknowledge that they killed that individual, but like you said before, they didn't acknowledge that they were prophets.
Well, Isaiah definitely, right, 100%. They would argue, yes, but they will say these are priests, the Jewish priests. They know they're Jews for sure. Yeah. But they might not argue that Zechariah and Yahya were prophets, in itself as a definition of a prophet, but they'll acknowledge them as being priests, which is my religious figure, if you will, which still is pretty bad nonetheless.
So they were all Jewish?
Yes. Yeah. They're all from Bani Isra'il. Yeah. They're all from that tribe of Judah.
Yeah, I've also read that they've asked rabbis, like the Jewish people, why do we kill our prophets? And they basically said that they didn't deny it. The rabbi was saying that we've been collecting our data for so long that you just find it in our books because we're one of the few people that have been collecting information. And even one of them was saying, like, the percentage is so low, like trying to justify that, like it's only 1% of the prophets.
I saw that argument. I read it. So it's not too bad. If you think about all the prophets, it's only 1%.
Yeah, like less than 1%.
I was like, that's great. I'm glad. You know what I mean? Well, that's not too bad if you only kill 1%. If we all abide by that, that'll be good. You guys are allowed to kill 1% of people. Whoever you don't like, just make sure it's low 1%. That you can still go to heaven with that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's pretty bad. I've seen that argument too. Yeah, so that's interesting things. But anyhow, so I wanted to bring that up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the Quran. So you might read that and you're like, oh, hold on, we took a class on this, we didn't even talk about it. But yes, this is what that's stated there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran doesn't specifically name who they killed. That's so it's up for us to do a little bit more investigation. We didn't have to go too far. It's in their own books. They admitted to it, if you will. All right. So I'll put this on up to kind of the main, one of the main topics of this class, and that is the identification of Isa alayhi salam with the Jews. Those who will come later were the Christians, which are pretty much Jews that just went off to another route, and then of course us as Muslims. So around 15 BCE, as mentioned, more a Bible date here, not really in the Quran or Hadith, you have the birth of Maryam alayhi salam. I'm not going to go into her life because I want to make this whole class just about Bani Isra'il. What she's mentioned in the Quran is not too much about her having a baby and going out and shaking the palm tree. It's not really talking about Bani Isra'il, but we all know the story very well. That she had Isa alayhi salam. We know about the Jibril coming in the form of a man, saying that you're going to have a baby, right? It's also mentioned that Zechariah, before he was killed, raised up Maryam alayhi salam in that second temple. That temple we're talking about just a while ago, right? This is where Maryam alayhi salam, more on this one over here, where she lived. And she had a quarters to worship in there. Okay, which once again, that's very rare because women don't worship in the temple. Some women in the Muslim community get a feisty that the women's section is very small, or it's upstairs or in a basement or in a corner somewhere, which is true, and I would agree with you. We need to work on that. But in the Jewish temple, they weren't even allowed to come inside there. Now, how did Maryam alayhi salam even get in there in the first place? And there's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in Surah Ali Imran, when her mother gave birth. And what she found out was a girl before they didn't have the course, ultrasounds and so forth. And so DNA testing, but I thought she was going to have a boy. And she said, God, I dedicated my birth to be worshiping you. And now it's a girl, right? So Allah said, no, go ahead. Still put her in the temple, let her worship. And so she had a mihrab, right? A room that all she did was worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Zechariah would come, and it's mentioned in the Quran, he would come and take care of her, and then she would find that food will just magically appear in the room, right, from a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So she didn't have, which is good, so she didn't have to interact with men, to come out or anything, that Allah already suffices her, right? So Zechariah alayhi salam, brings her up 4 years before the birth of Isa alayhi salam, year 0, if you will. Haran dies, right? So this is the King Haran. His son takes over after that. He's not too much of a great character in general. Yahya alayhi salam was born, and said 3 months before Isa alayhi salam. Okay, so that's why they're very close in the Bible stories and in Islam in general. Okay. Now, how did Bani Isra'il react to Maryam alayhi salam? Right? They see her as just as a Jewish woman. This is a Jewish woman that had a son. Okay, they don't believe in the miraculous birth, if anything special about it, but they know very much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions when she does have that baby. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala documents this in Surah Maryam, when she brings that baby out and coming out, and everyone knew Maryam alayhi salam was a chaste woman, doesn't talk to men in general, and she was carrying the baby, and the people say, oh, Maryam, you have committed something, a grave indeed. Or sister of Harun. Some people said that her father's name was Harun, or because she's from the lineage of Harun. There's 2 opinions on that. Neither your father was a man of evil, nor was your mother unchaste. Right. Here it doesn't say anything that the Jews said that that she committed adultery, nor does it say it in the Bible. But it's understood that that's one of the notions of the Jewish tradition, that she was adulterous, and unchaste woman, and a bad person for what she did, to put it that way. Okay, that's their belief. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that here that you committed something grave, which is adultery. They're accusing her of adultery. All right, so Allah documents that in the Quran here without saying the word adultery here. So she poured into the baby. Now she's holding Isa alayhi salam in her hands, and she said, how can we speak to someone who's a child? Like, how can the child speak? And then Isa alayhi salam speaks, and he says, verily, I'm a servant of Allah, of God Almighty. I'm a prophet. He has given me a book and made me a prophet. Okay, so that book, we all know that the New Testament, or we say the Injil, what do you got there? So Bani Isra'il, they're seeing this, and they're, of course, accusing her of adultery, and now the baby's speaking. What are they going to do with this story now? Okay, so this is probably our last slide for today. We're just going to go over this a little bit and talk about this in general. What did Isa alayhi salam tell Bani Isra'il? So he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I shall teach him the book and the wisdom and the Torah and the Injil, right? And make him a messenger to the children of Israel. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that he's going to get new scripture, right? Updating from the Torah that they had before. Okay. And be able to teach that. But guess what? They're not going to believe him, right? Because they're still looking for their Messiah. They're still looking for a prophet to come and rule for them, but they're not going to believe him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a lot of signs. So he says, I've come to you with a sign from my Lord that I will create for you from clay, something in the shape of a bird. I'll blow in it and it will become a lively bird, right? We know that you create a bird, blew into it, and it became real. I cure the blind, the born blind and the leopards. It's also in the Bible that he would do this. I cause the dead to become alive for the will of Allah. It's also mentioned in the Bible. There's a person named Lazarus that came back to life, that he healed him. So this also mentioned there. It doesn't mention by the will of Allah. In the Quran, it says that he's not doing it as being divine, but by the permission of Allah. I will inform you what you eat and what you store in your homes. This is surely a sign for you if you're true believers. So we're telling Bani Israel, like this, believe me, right? Because they're denying him as being a true prophet. Remember, there was no prophet that came for 400 years, according to them. I know Zechariah, Yahya, and them, and other prophets before there are not prophets for them. They're priests or maybe religious individuals, right? So he's trying to tell you that you had a 400-year gap, according to their belief, right? So he's trying to tell them, believe in me. I've come to you confirming the book which has been sent down prior to me, the Torah, and to make permissible some of which you have been prohibited. So it's mentioned that the Jews weren't able to eat fat from the animals. Some people say it was fish they were not allowed to eat. Birds that have claws. Some say that Jesus allowed them to work on the Sabbath. That's a little of a debate of whether he did that or not. But there's some things that he made permissible that was forbidden for them beforehand. I've come with you a sign from your Lord, so fear Allah and obey me, and surely your Lord, my Lord and your Lord, so worship him. This is a straight path. Okay, so he comes in there, and what you will see, and we'll go over this next week. We actually had a lot of time today to do it, but we'll go over this next week of how they don't believe that he is a prophet. Now, why don't they believe him he's a prophet? So you'll see that the Jews are, even up to today, they're still looking for a more of a political figure, someone that's going to bring the kingdom back to them, okay, and have the kingdom of God on earth here. So one thing you'll see that the Jews believe that heaven's here on earth, and something I mentioned before, that's not like somewhere else in another domain, another realm, if you will. And Isa alayhi salam wasn't really about that. He was more about trying to purify them and from all the bad habits that they had, and they're doing business transactions in the temple and all this kind of different things, and they lost their ways, if you will. Okay, so we'll go into that next week, and we'll also go into about how the Roman Empire, when they're ruling there, why did they care about Jesus, if they cared at all? If he's preaching, right? And how was it a challenge to the Roman rule at that time? And then what did the Romans do to him? What did the Jews do to them? Obviously, try to plot and try to crucify him. And we'll go into all those different types of things, and then we'll kind of move from there, what happens there. We'll lead up to the destruction of the temple in the year 70. Right now, we're year 0, okay, by the Romans. So the Romans will just end up destroying that temple itself, because they'll see the Jews will start rebelling against them and so forth. So I'll stop. Anyone have any questions on what we had?
You misspelled it. IMRAN, it should be non.
Amran, where is it at? This is a copy paste from the translation. So.
Surah Al Imran verses.
Iman. Oh, yeah, no, I wrote that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's no Surah Al Iman. Yeah.
I just had a question. So, from the biblical standpoint, I guess even from the Jewish standpoint, the timeline between, I guess it was Daniel, which is the last prophet in like 500 BC to
Malachi was what they call it.
How many do they have? How many prophets do they have in between that? Because it's like about 500 years.
Oh, 400 years.
400
So
years.
Malachi was the last one they have, which is not a prophet that we have anything in Quran or Sunnah about him, but they believe this was a person named Malachi who was their prophet. So he was around 400.
And that was the last one.
That was the
they
last
have
one.
Documented.
Yes. Well, for them, there's no prophet that ever came after that. Yeah, at all. They're still waiting. So they've been in drought for a long time. It's like 2,600 years.
So for them, when Prophet Isa alayhi salam came down to them, it wasn't anything new that like another person said, I'm a prophet.
Yeah.
To them, basically, right? 'Cause
I don't know if anyone-
400 years before.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if any of them. I don't know if they denied anyone before that said
Okay.
I'm a prophet. And they're like, nah, you're not.
I mean, they killed you said that they killed. Like,
They killed Zechariah. And yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not we're not. I guess.
From what I understand, they didn't really kill them because they said
Mhm.
that I'm a prophet. They killed Zechariah because he made a judgment against the king.
Okay.
And the king's like, no, you don't do that to me. And they killed him. They stoned him there. And then, we talked about it was the women that was dancing. It wasn't because he said, I'm a prophet, right? But here that Isa alayhi salam's now making very clear that I'm your prophet from you.
Yeah.
And maybe also because he's bringing out a new book. Right, and that's another thing.
He's a Rasul, not just a prophet.
Exactly. So that's also a challenge to their laws and so forth. Okay, he said that I'm gonna make something that's prohibited, lawful for you that wasn't lawful for you beforehand. I was kind of digging into all what scholars have said about that, but and maybe that was more of a challenge, and they didn't. And you will see that one of the main things why the Jews didn't like him during his time is that he was winning popularity. Now, Zechariah alayhi salam and Yahya alayhi salam wasn't doing these type of things, making a bird from clay and someone who's dead back to life. You start doing that, people start following you.
Yeah.
And then the Jews picked up on that hey, he's getting followers now and he's getting popularity and he's making us look like, he's ridiculing us and making us look silly because he started arguing against the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He's like the main religious bodies of the Jews at that time. And he was just stumping them by criticizing them and debating them. And so they're losing their popularity and everyone started following him a little bit more. And that's why they said we have to cut him out as quick as possible. And so that's why he's a much different figure than these individuals. Yeah. So we'll go into a lot of these different type of things there that's mentioned there.
I have some questions. So when you went on the other slide, you mentioned that Mary committed adultery
I mean, that's not our belief. That's what they would think.
in the Quran.
That, well, at least they said that. They don't say it outright, but they said, oh, Mary, you have committed something of grave indeed. It could, one thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very, uses a lot of mannerism in the Quran, right? When Maryam alayhi salam says that she's about to have a baby, says, no man has ever touched me. You don't get pregnant by touching, right? But out of mannerism, she doesn't say anything vulgar. So here that they allow to maybe tone down the words here, but you can see by that statement they're accusing her of adultery. You have kind of a grave sin, right? That's something that's big. That you've done something. How can you have a child? We know that you're not married, and you know that. So how can you be pregnant? And so that's what they accuse her of. Yeah.
So in Islam, Mary's viewed as she did.
No. This is what the maybe I wasn't clear. I want to really make sure I'm clear. No, that's good. I'm glad you asked that question. So as Islam, we believe it's a miraculous birth, just as the Christians will believe that it was, there was no conception of a male figure, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, this is the word of God inside of you, and she became.
And who's saying that?
These are the Jews
Oh, the Jews.
at the time. When she came with the baby back into the town, and they saw her with a baby, they're like, "How? What? We know you're not married. So you did adultery. Like you're pretty much that's the only way that you become pregnant and have a baby." So they started accusing. So Allah is just documenting what they said in the Quran, not what we believe that she actually did this.
Up to the crucifixion, I think the Christian and Islamic view of Isa is pretty much parallel.
Yeah, you could argue that.
The Lazarus, the birth,
Yeah.
the food miraculously on the wedding, the food showed up.
Yeah.
Went out. I mean, all of that
Yeah.
is pretty similar.
Very similar to that.
Arguing with the rabbis, and all
Yes.
that, throwing down the temple,
The
merchandise in the temple, all
the
that
table.
stuff. It's
Yeah.
pretty,
Flipping the table. Yeah.
I think it's pretty concurrent.
Yeah. Very true. That's true. Yeah. No problem. We could come up if anyone had. Everyone have anything else before we give some time? have a filibuster or something like that. There was some time to.
I think it's kind of interesting that they didn't believe in Isa alayhi salam as the Messiah of the Jews,
Mhm.
even though he was reviving the dead to life. But when the Dajjal comes back, he does many of these similar things because a lot of the Jews tend to follow him.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that.
He comes, and that's the very thing. He does bring people back from dead to life. He has fire and water in his hand. He's doing like really kind of miraculous things. But one thing, he becomes more of a political figure. Like he comes into everyone's land, as the Prophet said, he will enter everyone's house, right? More of a dominance in terms of I'm their leader, if you will.
That might be. I'm saying that's like he's like perfect. He fits there.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah, exactly. Which is it's true.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay.
So what happened to the mother of Mary? Because you're saying that Zechariah raised her. So
Yeah.
the mother was
And the Quran doesn't mention that what happened to her. It's mentioned that she made the dua, the supplication that Allah, I'm dedicating what's in my stomach for your worship. And then when she had a girl, she's like, oh, how is she going to worship? And that's all it really mentions Ali Imran. And then Allah says that, the guy and the girl is not the same, but that she still was able to worship in the temple. But that's it. There's nothing else about what happened after her. I guess it's not super significant. I think she might have just died as a regular death or something like that. But she doesn't mention anything else. I didn't mention her name in the Quran itself, but just mentioned that one dua that she makes, that dialogue with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. That's about it.
So, I wonder why that historical relationship here is so different between the Christian and Islam. About Mary, that she had to come back. By then she was married, right?
Yeah.
To what we call Joseph.
Joseph, yeah, that's the.
And then they moved because they do this. How you call it? They do that counting where the people, the Romans wanted to count.
Oh, the census. Yeah.
And they moved back from Nazareth towards
Galilee.
Jerusalem and Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Because there's actually a physical place where Jesus was allegedly born.
Yeah.
Which is not in the temple in Jerusalem.
No, I think it's from Galilee. I think.
Bethlehem.
Oh, Bethlehem. Okay, Bethlehem. Oh, yeah.
There's a place called the birthplace.
Out there, yeah, there were the nativity. Yeah.
Place that a lot of Christians would worship.
Right. We don't have that story of the Joseph the carpenter as the husband or stepfather of with Maryam alayhi salam. We don't have that. He's not really mentioned in the Quran at all. So, but anyway, it's definitely mentioned in the Bible. We'll definitely go over that. Yeah, next week or so.
They mentioned that the present day Jews, they follow their Torah.
Yes.
And then whatever they're really good followers of their Torah.
Yes.
So how much is the difference between that Torah and the one before?
You mean like the original Torah?
Like they have, of course, altered it a lot.
Yes.
According to their likings.
100%. I wanted to present that today, and I found myself having a lot of trouble finding information of who wrote these books, the Torah, and then they have a bunch of other books in the Old Testament, and it's just really not documented where these books actually came from and who actually wrote it very much that I could find, other than the Council of Nicaea, if those are familiar with the Council of Nicaea. And it kind of feels like the Christians are the one that kind of put these books together. I know much later on, but yeah, I'm gonna try to answer that question next week. I have the slides ready. This is like some of the stuff, the verses where Allah mentions that they changed the Torah.
And I have another question. That now we see a lot of friendship and a lot of understanding between the Jews and the Christians.
Yeah.
So they have kind of molded the Christians to believe in, and that they are not the killers of so-called Islam.
That's gonna be one of our last sessions. We're gonna go into Christian Zionism. Why are the Christians so supportive of Israel, and why are they one of the biggest Zionists in America? And a lot of it is kind of like just a quick answer to that is that they're pretty much using the Jews to build their temple because they believe that is one of the prerequisites for Jesus to come back. And they want Jesus to come back because they're going to meet him this event called the rapture, where Jesus will come down and they'll meet Jesus and they'll, have a whole ceremony with him. And they want Jesus to come back because that's the Son of God, right? But for him to come back, they need the temple to be buried according to their beliefs. That's one of the prerequisites for that. So they're like, hey, the Jews are trying to do that. Let's fund that. So we get Jesus back, right? And funny because the Jews don't even believe in Jesus, but they'll take the money, right? So yeah, so Qadi brought this up in one of his talks where he, interviewed a rabbi and said, "What do you think about Christians like giving you money like this?" He's like, "No, we'll take it." You know what I mean? Like, even though we don't believe any of their books and we don't believe that Jesus was a prophet or anything, but hey, it's weird because it's going to have a clash afterwards, and they both all think that they're right. Some magic is going to happen when that temple is built, but we have a whole other story about exactly what's going to happen to these two individuals. We have the Dajjal showing up with for the Jews. And then we have Isa alayhi salam is coming back actually to kill their leader, right? The Dajjal. And actually they're going to, and we're all back watching this or participating at least with Isa alayhi salam, right? Of the Mahdi and his army and so forth. So that's one of our last sessions. We'll go to all these signs of the Day of Judgment. And that'll be like the summary of one of our last classes when we go over it, inshallah. Yeah. But that's not an answer is that they really want that temple to build because it's a prerequisite. That's when we'll go a little bit more in depth about it, but that's kind of the summary.
There's more evangelical issue rather than the Catholic. There's a bit of difference in
the Catholics don't believe that?
Opinion.
Okay.
It's a bit different.
Okay, interesting.
That's why it's so strong in America. Because Catholicism is kind of a secondary religion.
Compared to Protestants and evangelists,
different Baptists and Presbyterians.
And all the different groups. Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And then, brother, I recently just read the headlines that Brother Umar Sulaiman has said that the Dajjal has already arrived. So I didn't understand.
Oh, did he say that?
Yeah, it's set on the like a headline. So I didn't get to read it, but maybe I thought you had heard of it.
I would maybe check the source of that first and foremost. There's definitely signs of his coming and so forth. We know that. We know the signs of the Day of Judgment. I don't know how he would have known that he came out. I'm not too sure.
You say like in your class that you did a long time ago about the eschatology.
Yeah.
That some people say he's shaken on an island.
Oh yeah, so we have that hadith that he's on an island during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If that's it, it could be that he's there on this island. But if he's out and about, that's another that's another story. And I don't know how you would confirm that, honestly. Yeah, but interesting. With what's going on right now in the world, it would seem that Allahu Alam, it might be quite close to those type of times. But I always kind of also mention that all the previous generations that came when the Babylonians defeated the temple, that all people all thought that was the end of the world also. So every generation comes and think that they were at the end of the world. So Allahu Alam, we do have time, signs, but who knows exactly? I definitely don't want to say that. But anyhow, anything?
Yeah, two quick unrelated things. I think John Carpenter in the
John Carpenter.
So I think he's the spouse or somehow betrothed to Mary. So it's interesting though, if you read like in the Catholic scripture or their exegesis to these things, they say that she was 13 or 12 at this time, right? It's ironic that they pin the same thing like why is Aisha But if you look at it in their own scriptures, it's there. It's in their own exegesis.
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah, that's why even it's mentioned here that 15, which means that she would probably, she would be 15 years old when Isa alayhi salam was born, or 16.
And she was already engaged or whatever it was to him, like 2 years prior to this.
Yeah, from their information. Yeah. That's true. That's a good argument back to that age.
And one other thing is how in the Quran they talk about how Isa alayhi salam flew into the front and gave it life.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in the current Bible. So the current they have subsequent books that are not canonized. Like they found, like for example, in other places that may have been written in that time, and those actually mention. There are other books that talk about that. So the question is, how would Prophet would know if these books predated in the actual story?
That's there's more miracles that are mentioned in the Quran about Isa alayhi salam than the Bible itself, and some of them like what you mentioned here. Yeah. So they don't have a lot of this stuff that we actually have. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a very good point about how they actually got their canons. But anyhow. All right. May Allah bless all of you. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll meet next Sunday. At the end, we'll make dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Ya Ghafur. Anta salam wa minka salam. تباركت يا ذو الجلال والإكرام. اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم يا رحمن الرحيم. We ask you to accept this class from us, put it on a scale of hasanat on Yawm al-Qiyamah, make it a proof for us and a proof against us. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to keep us guided in the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. O Allah subhanahu, forgive us for our wrongdoings. We ask you to enter us in your Jannah, Ya Kareem, Ya Rahman Ar-Rahim. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to free the lands of Palestine from the oppressors. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you to aid our brothers and sisters, protect their lives, their homes, their children, Ya Kareem, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun al mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah bless you. We'll see you next Sunday, inshallah.
Okay. Thank you for this.
You're welcome.